you're kind of, on the one hand, you're trying to devise this scheme of communication, and at the same time, kind of undermining it or fucking it up. I mean,
absolutely.
that's, I presume, very intentional.
Yeah, it is. I cannot for the life of me create installations. For example, the last one that I had done. The last one I had done was in Mexico City, and it was for a graphic design audience. It was at a major conference, it was at a big time gallery, and and I was going to get this huge population of graphic designers and typographers to view it and see it.
Now, did you think that they're already loaded with information and experience that's similar to yours? Were you expecting that they would have a certain response or a certain accessibility to it?
Yeah. I thought it would be, it was an educated audience and somebody sympathetic to what I was doing. But I mean, all of these installations are, I sincerely do not have the capacity to speak clearly through these things. I just don't find the use in one person referred to them as a series of locks and keys, and a lot more locks than keys. And it's true. I have a lot of complex information, and I'm not giving it up easily.
So what was the response of this graphic design audience?
Well, it was mixed. I think for the most part, a lot of people were they enjoyed the pure visceral reaction to the forms.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I was presenting it as typography. I mean, it was a 3-story word, and the word was fallen. And it was huge. It was 3 stories in this cube. And the response was, that's not typography. And it's not graphic design. And I've been hearing that for a long time, and I like it. And so every individual installation that I've done, and I've done a lot of them to this point, never represents any single kind of attempt at solving this puzzle. But I know that they all contribute to this kind of overall journey towards maybe unlocking some kind of puzzle of, it's answering the question of, is there another way? Is it possible that graphic design exists in a closed system? And I think it absolutely does. And we contribute to this idea of simplicity, and we love simplicity, even though creating things that are simple is a lot of work. And if you step back from things that are simple, if you stop making things overly simplified, what happens to them? Well, they become naturally complex. And I think that's kind of the way we were built, the way we're programmed. And it seems that we're trying very hard to unprogram ourselves to do that.
You talked earlier about compiling like a library of forms and typologies, and it's, when you came to install, you also have a kind of library of materials. It seems that you've accumulated like a toolbox that you are building and constantly drawing from when you're making work.
Right. Yeah, the materials kind of have evolved over time. I've cultivated an awareness of all sorts of different materials that are everyday materials, but also fabricated materials, like the steel. That was a new thing for this installation, a new material that I hadn't used before.
It works really well, actually.
Yeah, I was really excited about it.
I wonder, in this piece and in others that I've seen, there's I don't recall any color. Maybe I'm not remembering, but is there a reason you prefer kind of monochrome?
There is. If I were to show you photos of my very, very first installation, it would be very, very bright and colorful. There's a lot of color. In fact, neon color and reds and blues and transparent color.
Did you find that a little too distracting?
Yeah. The farther I got, it's complex enough, black and white. The real reason is because I love harsh black and white graphic design. It's so pure, right? Mm-hmm. And doing just harsh contrast, black and white images like this, I don't know, it gets me in a way that I just really, really love.
Black and white puts you in that position where you don't have any other crutches to lean on.
Yeah,
like
right.
any of those decorative frills that
Yep.
that color can kind of, it's not a cheat, but it's like a color film versus a black and white film. If you make a black and white film, then you really have to shoot it well.
Yep.
It's really got to be about composition and form.
Yeah.
And you can't just slide by.
Right. There's a certain purity to black and white, right?
I think in one of your artist statements, you talked about, or you think you used the phrase autobiographical rants. And is it rant in just kind of a broad emotional sense, or?
But they're autobiographical. They're related to kind of one of the main motivations for doing this work was feeling alienated early on in my career, yeah. No, I should also say that this particular installation is a pretty big departure from those autobiographical rants, because it doesn't actually say anything. And I'll admit to that this time. In all of my other ones, I was desperately holding onto the tail of the dragon and keeping it, just barely within reach, this typography or this sentence in some way. All of them have been this way. And this time I was building the first letter forms in the space where the wall kind of comes out and curves. And I said, is it really that important? And I removed the obligation to hang on to this tail and to hang on to the letter forms and hang on to the actual message, and just to see what would happen. And it was really liberating. It was like, okay, well, this time it's going to be more about the shape and the form. And so even though the materials that I've used and all of the process was very similar to the past, and it's all based on typography. In fact, there's letter forms embedded all over this thing.
Right.
It doesn't actually attempt to form any words.
Right. And would you say that your even the letter forms are within this piece? Would you say you've kind of loosened up your treatment of letter forms? So it's almost like dropping the letter part and just leaving the forms part?
Yep. Let them be, let the letter forms be letter forms, and not have them obliged to connect the B to the R, or the B to the E, or anything else,
The other thing I love about this piece, and I've noticed in other works, is there's a lot of negative space. I mean, I love that, because I love when artists understand that you need some. But I mean, you come from being a designer, but the sense that negative space has weight too, right?
Yeah, right.
And if you put up a certain amount of stuff, unless your point is to be over the top and just cram everything in, if you're hoping for some kind of balance in the end, you're going to have to have this entity exist comfortably within negative space.
Right.
Yeah. So there's this sort of nice framing device of this sort of space on the bottom, the space on the top, and the space on the end that really kind of hugs the piece.
Absolutely. Yeah. The negative space is so important, because if you can activate that space in some way, in a very, very, very subtle but sophisticated way. I mean, when I create these things, I can actually hear the ringing in your ear after you were to see like a really good concert and it's really loud, and the next morning your head is ringing. It's that sound. And if you can activate that negative space, that's the sound I can hear. And it's almost painful, but it's very conscious, and it's very
sorry about that.
No problem.
So, in Buffalo in the last few years, especially with the Book Art Center opening up, there sort of seems to be this resurgence in typography. It's sort of, it's typography rising again like a phoenix.
Right.
Is that, do you like that? Does it seem nostalgic to you? Or, because there is a kind of, there is this sort of old-timey quality about
Right.
which I love. I mean, I love old letter presses and things like that.
Yeah.
So there is this sort of back to the roots thing. Do you think there's an adequate resurgence or emergence of new forms as well alongside that?
I think there will be. I think there will be over time. If we had this conversation again in a couple of years, I think it would be different.
Yeah.
It's, you know, the letterpress thing, you know, globally seems to be having a, you know, a kind of a renaissance.
Yeah. And that's just, I'm sure that can be framed within a just sort of a people wanting, in a digital world, wanting that tactile element.
Right.
You know?
I mean, I have this conversation with colleagues all the time, and even students, you know, it's like, you know, the digital world makes us dumber, and the digital world makes us do all these things, and well, and that's why we're moving back to this more hands-on approach. I think it's all bullshit, actually. I just think that the digital world has been around long enough so that it's like the new kid on the block, and it's just, okay, so then its popularity has leveled off. It hasn't changed anything. You know, and
people get used to their new tools.
Right,
Yeah.
and it just becomes part of the landscape.
But then suddenly the old tools, which people haven't used for an amount of time, suddenly seem newer because they've been out of touch with them.
Right.
Yeah.
And everyone likes to place an enormous amount of importance on those events. In fact, it's just part of the evolution. I think it was going to happen anyways. Yeah, I mean, in Buffalo, we're really lucky to have the Book Arts Center, you know, and Rich Kegler's, you know, he's a pretty big mouth in the design world, so he's good at creating a lot of attention for this area. And you know, only 2 years ago, we had TypeCon was in Buffalo, which is a major typography conference. And we had exhibitions, and we had speakers. We had some of the biggest designers in the world.
Oh, you
here
did
in
the
Buffalo.
poster for that, right? Didn't you?
No, I did. I did
What am I
a
thinking
poster.
of? I'm thinking of.
I don't, yeah.
You did this great poster a couple of years ago. For
I did.
Something at
Right.
UB, or?
At UB, yeah, we had the keynote speaker, well, the speakers for the conference was at UB. There was 3 designers from the Netherlands, and they were the guys I used to work for in the Netherlands, and they came to do the keynote. They did a workshop, they did a dance party, and
Of course they did.
of course they did. It was awesome too. It was a good time.
Having had, although you're American and you know, based in North America, but you've had, you know, connections. You mentioned the design magazine or the magazine that you did the piece for that's coming out. Is there any? Did you draw any distinction between North American and European design worlds in terms of what you're doing?
I think.
Are the Europeans more open to it?
I think not necessarily. I think the idea that Europeans are more open to it is a well-accepted idea, but the reality is not really. I mean, they're just as pragmatic as we are. We just happen to be doing it on a larger scale. There's more of us here.
Right.
I've had exhibitions in Europe, and they're received in kind of the same way. You know, I have an exhibition in London in 3 or 4 months, and I have a feeling that it will be accepted and received in a very similar way.
The same range of response that you get elsewhere.
Yeah.
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 Well, that's great. You know, it's been a great pleasure having this work here. So I want to thank you for all your hard work and doing such a great job. And you know, I hope it was you know, a good experience for you.
It absolutely was. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Mm-hmm.